afternoon. Welcome to our lunch panel. Lunch panel means we appreciate you eating and drinking, but maybe reducing the talking. The panel is called Interreligious Approaches to Integral Human Development. As you heard from Angie's question, IHD, Integral Human Development, is very important here at the Q School, and we do not want anyone to leave campus without having heard something about IHD. My name is Clemens Sedmak, and I teach social ethics here at the Q School, and I'm also a fellow of the Ansari Institute. They lowered their bar a little bit here. And I've been asked to moderate this multifaith panel that invites reflections on the significance of religion engaged as a whole, encompassing its full range of relevance to everyday life. This panel has been organized, as I mentioned, by the Ansari Institute for Global Engagement with Religions. The Ansari Institute is fairly new and has just launched its strategic plan. Now you have to deliver on it, Marat. Copies of which are available on site for those who are interested. On site means somewhere here?
Yes, at the table on their way in.
On the table on your way out, he means. Yes. Our panel is dedicated to IHD. Integral human development is an important concept here at the Keough School of Global Affairs. The school, in fact, is built on the vision of IHD. Integral human development is the commitment to the development of each person and the whole person, putting the idea of dignity at the center of discourses and practices. IHD means the human person needs bread, but does not live by bread alone. IHD means the deep union between food and food for thought. That's why we have a lunch panel. IHD attempts to take the person in all her dimensions seriously. One important dimension of the human person is the spiritual dimension. As some of you know, we will all die at some point, and we do not know what will happen afterwards. We are creatures of hope and meaning-making and mystery and the imagination. This multi-faith panel will feature a conversation about the complexity of the human person. We have wonderful panelists with us. They are also here as part of a steering committee for a book award in religion and global affairs to recognize and elevate important work being done on topics related to the theme of the panel. Let me please introduce our panelists in the order of speaking. Carolyn Thompson-Brown, to my far left, is board chair of the Fetzer Institute and retired director of the Office of Scholarly Program and the John W. Klug Center at the Library of Congress. In that capacity, she provided vision and direction to programs that fund the world's most accomplished and most promising scholars for periods of residency to conduct research in the library's collections. She has also directed the Poetry and Literature program. Her professional writings examine the interrelationship of literature, culture, and psychology with special focus on modern Chinese literature. She is the author of Reading Luke Sun through Carl Jung, a book on spiritual healing. She has also authored an influential essay, Footprints of the Soul, Uniting Spirit with Action in the World. Carolyn holds a BA in Asian Studies, an MA in Chinese Literature, both from Cornell, and a PhD from the American University. Welcome, Carolyn, to the panel. Thank you for being with us here. You can applaud. Anantanand Rambachan. It's such a beautiful name. Anantanand is an expert in multi-faith engagement and author of A Hindu Theology of Liberation. He is professor of religion at St. Olaf College, Minnesota. He was also visiting professor at the Academy for the Study of World Religions at the University of Hamburg in the dry north of Germany for a number of years and did not lose his sense of humor. He is an influential voice on Hinduism, the author of many books. The BBC transmitted a series of 25 lectures on Hinduism by Anantanand around the world. He is active in the dialogue program of the World Council of Churches and was a Hindu guest and presenter in 4 general assemblies of the World Council of Churches. He is also involved in the consultations of the Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue at the Vatican. Welcome, Anantanand, to the panel. Thank you for being here. Claire Brown, to my right, is a practitioner of Buddhism and author of Buddhist Economics, an enlightened approach to the dismal science. She is Professor Emerita at the University of California in Berkeley, where she taught in the economics department. Claire was educated at Wellesley College and at the University of Maryland, where she completed her PhD in economics. Her research focused on employment disparities between gender and race, role of unemployment insurance, and women in the workplace. Later, Claire focused on the global labor market for high-tech workers, the global competitive advantage of China, India, and the US in the semiconductor industry, and the impact of education and immigration policies on engineers' employment and earnings. Maybe these topics are not everyone's way into Buddhism, but it has worked for Claire. Claire is an Omron Fellow at the Indonesia Institute of Technology in Japan. Welcome, Claire, to the panel. Thank you for being with us. Introducing Mahan Mirza to this audience is a little bit of an insult. We all know Mahan Mirza, the executive director of the Ansari Institute for Global Engagement with Religion, which hosts this panel. He's a wonderful colleague, and I don't say that about everyone, but most of them, and an Islamic studies scholar as well as expert on religious literacy. Mahan has served as Dean of Faculty at Zaytuna College in Berkeley, California, America's first accredited Muslim liberal arts college. Immediately before his appointment to the Ansari Institute, Mahan served as the lead faculty member for Notre Dame's Madrasa Discourses project, which equips Islamic religious leaders in India and Pakistan with the tools to confidently engage with pluralism, modern science, and new philosophies. Mahan holds a BS in mechanical engineering from the University of Texas at Austin, an MA from Hartford Seminary, and a PhD in religious studies from Yale University. Welcome, Mahan, to your own institute's panel. I have asked each panelist to give us 4 to 5 minutes opening statements. I told them that I would be interested in exploring questions such as, what does integral human development mean to you personally and from your religious tradition? What are some of the challenges? What is your personal experience? How do you see the global role of religions? I'm looking forward to a rich discussion. May I please give the floor to you, dear Carolyn?
Thank you. Integral human development, for me, body, mind, and spirit. We've spent a lot of time this morning talking about body and mind, want to talk about spirit, but I do want to note that Dr. Obi, I will not try her last name, began talking about the Bible. She began with spirit, and she began with the grounding in spirit. Human beings are meaning-making creatures. We come, ask who we are, how we got here. One thing religion does is it offers answers to that. Different experiences give you different answers. When we start out, we probably accept the answers that we've given, and then we wrestle with the answers and our questions and whatnot. But where does religion begin? And I'm going to venture that it begins with an experience of the sacred reality, sacred divinity, whatever we want to name it. To quote Taoism, the name that can be named is not the eternal name, so we know we cannot name it in language, but with that experience, the visionary who's had that tries to communicate. You get stories, you get parables, and you get theology, you get philosophy, but all of those are designed to make it possible for us lesser beings to at least get an insight into that, sometimes to have the experience in some small way ourselves. And that experience, curiously, almost always seems to involve a moral, ethical dimension. I'll call it love. I'm a Christian in my background. There are other ways to name love, compassion, dignity. I'll call it love. We know our challenge in this time is to figure out how these different experiences of the divine and their expression can talk to one another. I know little about really interreligious dialogue, but I think I do know that it often takes place on the grounds of shared morality and shared ethics, and then people coming together as human beings to experience their human deepness. I'm going to make another suggestion. We talk about reimagining. Suppose, what would it be like, and I don't know the answer to this question, what would it be like if we came together on the basis of our grounding in the experience of mystery itself? What would that be like? And I end with a short story. In my job at the Kluge Center, I was graced to have as a scholar a cardinal of the church. And not being Catholic, I was able to talk to him as a person. I didn't have all the protocols. I don't know how you talk to a cardinal. So I talked to him as a person. And we went to lunch. I invited him to lunch. I'm a little bit nervy sometimes. And I asked him about his spiritual journey, okay? And he began telling me about this and that and whatnot. And then he got to the point of that mysterious encounter. And he stopped. But I could feel the change in his energy. And I knew better than to ask a cardinal to tell me about his encounter with God. So I didn't. But at a later point, he was engaged and invited by the State Department to engage in some high-level diplomacy with ayatollahs in Iran. And he had to tell me because he was a scholar and he was very dutiful. He was supposed to be at the center. And he said that what enabled them to have to talk freely, the cardinal and the ayatollah, was the deep spiritual experience. They were men of deep religious conviction. And I think, now I'm imagining a little bit because he didn't tell me quite this much, but I'm imagining that if you can create a container grounded in your experience of that spiritual mystery. You know, we're at Notre Dame. We're not at MIT. I can say this, I think. You create, talk about it, a space of imagination. When you allow spirit to enter in, new things can happen, and you don't know what's going to happen, which I guess is why you need to be careful about that. But new things can happen. And I just want to, I think I have a second to talk about experience last night.
You have a second, yep.
With one of your own members of your peace team, and I asked her, how do you? I bet in order to do this work in dangerous places with people at battle with each other, I bet you have to do deep spiritual practice. Do you meditate? Do you pray? Do you this, that, and the other? She said, all of it. Okay, who you are affects the ecosystem in which you're in, and you'd better be sure that who you are is centered and grounded. If you're a humanist in your deep humanity, but if you're a person of spirit, you want to ground it in your experience of God and divine mystery.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Anantana, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Clemens. Greetings, friends. Speaking about integral human development from the perspective of my tradition, the Hindu tradition, requires a confession. And I think this place is a good place to start with a confession. Why I say that is because I can't speak without acknowledging that my tradition has not consistently supported and advocated for the full development of all human beings. Hindu teachings that are supportive of integral human development have been overlooked in the history of this tradition, and the interpretations offered at various times to justify social structures that impede human development. I'm speaking here especially about hierarchical and unequal orderings of human beings in systems like caste and patriarchy that continue to undermine the dignity of hundreds of millions of people, depriving them of both the freedom and the resources that are vital to their flourishing. And my tradition has been complicit in offering interpretations that legitimize such structures. So I think that one of the challenges and responsibilities, as we speak from a religious place of meaning about integral human development, is to identify the ways in which our traditions have been complicit in perpetuating structures of injustice, marginalization, and exclusion. Our focus cannot be narrowly spiritual or otherworldly, but we have to contest interpretations in our traditions that have been proffered, as I said, to condone such structures. And such structures continue to be generated. New structures of marginalization and exclusion we are seeing today in India with the rise of Hindu nationalism, and the increase in violence, especially against the minority religious communities, and particularly Muslim and Christian population. So that's where I start. And at the same time, I want to use the few minutes that I have to share with you at least a very traditional Hindu understanding of what integral human development would mean. I don't have the time to offer all of the reinterpretations that this would require in order to make it a meaningful vision, because I think a part of the challenge is that we could very easily speak about integral human development and do so within structures of injustice. In other words, if we speak of the good life, it is important to say the good life for all, to say integral human development for all, and to look closely at those structures within which we still speak unjustly. So this is a four-dimension traditional way of thinking about development. I just mentioned it briefly, and maybe we could discuss first. Each one has a short Sanskrit term. So the first is the material dimension of life. In Sanskrit, we speak of this as artha. It includes wealth, but also power, social status, success. The Hindu tradition has never given its blessings to involuntary poverty. It emphasizes the need of every human being for those necessities of life that lead to dignified living, opportunities for education, professional development, all included in artha. The second you would find interesting. We don't often speak about it, but in Sanskrit it is karma, leisure or pleasure. It includes both the sensuous and the aesthetic. So when we look at the history of this tradition, sculpture, music, dance flourished with the blessings of the Hindu tradition. I would say karma as a dimension of the good life includes all of those activities that we do as human beings that are not easily defined as goal-oriented or outcome-oriented, such as playing with your child, taking a walk with your spouse, enjoying a good meal. That's an important part. But you can see the relationship between artha and karma. If one has to work at 3 jobs just to maintain a living, there's not much time to play with your child, to have a good meal with your spouse, or so artha directly impacts our ability for leisure. But the tradition has seen that as an important component in the definition of a good life. We should have the resources to enjoy life, to celebrate life. The good life is not one that is reduced to an ascetic minimum. Let me put it in that.
1 minute.
1 minute. The third has to do with moral development or ethics. So material and aesthetic pursuits may be self-centered. It is dharma that brings us. The third is dharma. Dharma brings us to think about ethical development as a component of a good human life. So this is the dimension that requires that we broaden our perspectives to incorporate the good and the well-being of the common good. Dharma is a realm of the common good. Again, I admit that there are interpretations of dharma that support the status quo. So we need to rethink. We need to rethink the dharma of corporations. Traditionally, we haven't been speaking. We need to rethink the dharma of nations. We've thought about it largely in individual sense. And finally, I mentioned, in addition to the physical or material, the aesthetic, the ethical, the spiritual, which my colleague Caroline spoke of. The idea that even after satisfying all material and aesthetic and even moral needs, there is still a longing. We are created for something more. And I just end with one quote from the sacred Hindu text. That simply to make that point, I quote, "Only when people will be able to roll up the sky like a piece of leather will suffering come to an end without first knowing God."
Beautiful.
As St. Augustine said, the human heart is restless until it finds God. And I think the spiritual is the fourth dimension, the ontological dimension that then gives meaning to all other dimensions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we started with a plea for the experience of the sacred, then moved on to a self-critical question of the structural complicity of religious traditions in the plural, and the 4 dimensions of the human person, with this reminder of there's so much more to the person than the material or the social or even the moral and aesthetical. Claire, please. Thank you.
Good afternoon. It's wonderful to be here with you, and I really thank you for inviting me, and I really appreciate you all being here so together we can explore human dignity, human development, and especially how to put our spiritual lives into our everyday lives. So let me start out and tell you that by the way, as you know, I'm an economist, but don't leave yet. The cookies are quite good, and also I think we should demand more from economists who are quite narrow-minded often. So let's see what we can say from a Buddhist perspective also, which is, Buddhism acknowledges interdependence. That's a very important part of the way we see the world, that everybody's interdependent with each other and all beings and with nature. And then Buddhism also emphasizes impermanence. The world's dynamic, impermanence is always changing, which is actually quite good, thank goodness, although the changes can be both positive and negative. And then also, people are altruistic, which is critical, that people, of course, are self-caring, but they care for each other, and they care for each other without expecting something in return. And so once you make those 3 basic assumptions, you turn neoliberal economics on its head, where people are only selfish, where people are just out to maximize income and whatever they can do and power. And all of a sudden, you have a new way of visioning the world, but you also have a new way to think about economics. And so I'd like to bring some of that to you today in talking about what is dignity. Well, from a Buddhist economics approach, dignity is ensuring everyone has a comfortable life and that everyone has an opportunity to fully develop their skills and talents, and then also use their skills and talents to help the community and the world and the people around them. And then we go on further to say, Marty Ascent taught us all of this with capabilities, so it's not something new. It's just something that economists, too many, ignored, and we really do need to move beyond a materialistic world where how well off you are doesn't depend upon your income once you have a comfortable way of living and caring for your family, but it really depends upon developing yourself and your skills and talents and then using them for others. And the neuroscientists tell us actually that's what makes you happy. If you're feeling really down and out, go out and help someone. And another idea that they tell us is go out and enjoy nature. And those 2 things really make you happy, and not just in the moment, but they're longer lasting. If you go shopping, you might like it for a little bit, but then you usually have buyer's remorse, and then you're grasping again and suffering from your overconsumption and your wasteful consumption, which unfortunately is also killing the earth. And so when I think, too, about human development and integral human development, let me tell you about the Buddhist approach to wealth. You have inner wealth and you have outer wealth. Inner wealth is developing your spiritual life, is getting to know who you are and what you can bring to the world. And that's really important, and that takes time. And it also, inner wealth, is learning to sort of try and push away your bad habits of, anger or greed or whatever it is that we know we could do better, and developing the good daily habits of generosity and wisdom. And wisdom in Buddhism is not taking society's views and bringing them in. The external stimuli do not guide your life, but your internal stimuli do, of who you are and what your values are and what you can bring to the world. And so let me then say, outer wealth isn't all bad, because there are 2 kinds of outer wealth. There's outer wealth. We all need a decent place to live and enough food and education and healthcare and all the things that we want to help provide ourselves and our families and our communities. But outer wealth also includes nature and the environment. So in that sense, we are all rich. We are really rich. And if you want to know how rich you are, go for a walk. Beautiful campus. explore the lakes, go visit the flowers in the spring, enjoy nature.
1 minute.
Great. And in the last minute, let me just say to you, my final message is courage. We all need courage. We need courage to get up and demand the changes that we know we need to have the world and lives we want. And we know to do that, we actually need to be activists. We go out there and work with others, join with networks to create these changes. And we also need courage to live with justice, courage to enjoy life. And so be persistent, make demands, work with others, and together we can create the world. It's a process. It takes time, so join in and let's all do it together.
Thank you
Thank
so much, Claire, for this reminder of wisdom, courage, justice, altruism, and happiness. Professor Mirza, my friend.
Yes. Thank you, Clemens. Thanks to all of you. In my past life, I worked as a design and project engineer. Our company was somewhere in the middle of the contract food chain. We were hired by giant firms, and we in turn employed subcontractors for small jobs. One of the standard clauses in our contracts was the right to pay when paid. What this meant was that if our subcontractors had completed their work, we had the right to withhold payment until we had been paid by our employer. As a practicing Muslim, I was deeply troubled by this clause. The Prophet Muhammad is reported to have said, "Pay the worker their wages before the sweat dries from their brow." We were a wealthy corporation. Our ability to accrue micro profits caused great misery to others. We had the ability to drive startups without deep pockets out of business. The bracketing of religion in spaces like the one I worked in does not create neutral spaces. It just replaces one set of norms with another. In this case, for the worse. In her book, A Problem from Hell, America and the Age of Genocide, Samantha Power reports that moral arguments are simply inadmissible in government. One official says, if you propose something because it is the right thing to do, it virtually guarantees that you don't get invited to the next meeting. Dr. Obi spoke in her keynote yesterday about the faulty moral premise of our modern world. There you have it. One is compelled to wonder, if moral arguments are inadmissible, then what is? How should we think about the place of religion? Does the wholesale bracketing of faith make a better world? Or must we rethink where we draw the line? Is the systematic ostracization of faith-based morality contributing to our complex crises? Gross inequalities in the global system, climate change, war. Samantha Power's conclusion is sobering. It's not that the policy system fails, she argues. It's that it is actually ruthlessly effective. Echoes of Power's lament are found in the diagnosis of Jeffrey Sachs, another development economist, who says that the problem is not that the system is broken. The problem is that it is working per design. We have a system, he says, but we need a different system. Faith-based institutions enmeshed in so-called rational, efficient bureaucracy structures are not immune from moral paralysis. I serve on the advisory board of a faith-based institution. Last week, 2 individuals approached us for help to deliver medical kits for Ukrainians fleeing from remote villages where major aid organizations were unable to reach. These individuals had contacts on the ground and a supplier lined up. They just needed an institutional partner to process the donations. We hesitated. Why? Everyone on the board was deeply concerned about the innocents, but we didn't know if we would have the bandwidth. We balked at the known unknowns. We had to proceed to other agenda items. There is no time to pause on today's Jericho Road. We decided not to decide. It nearly broke me. IHD. So when I think of integral human development, I think of how our institutions at every level shatter us. From one end, we must bracket faith. From the other end, we are squeezed by what the South Korean-born German philosopher Byung-Chul Han calls the compulsion to achieve, which even accompanies us during leisure time. If I can conclude by connecting the thoughts of Dr. Obi Ezekwesili and Drs. Obi Ezekwesili and Ann Pendleton from last night and this morning, we need to remake the world from the ground up to escape the tyranny of the possible. Thank you all for your attention, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Mahan. We have... Oh, you should have applauded for the first two panelists as well. So we have 19 minutes, and I see three themes emerging. One is taking up where Mahan left us, the question of systems and structures, and Anantanan talking about the complicity also of religious traditions in unjust structures and systems. Maybe we can start here. What we heard also this morning, yesterday evening, a paradigm change and reimagining the world. How do you see the role of religion in this system change? Anyone on the panel? There is no fixed order. We start with Caroline spontaneously. Yes.
Well, I just note that we are part of the system, and therefore, how we are, as well as what we do, is going to impact that system. And I think we need to bring, obviously, intellectual acuity and all the tools that Anne mentioned this morning, and all the passion that Dr. Obi brought to us, but also our own inner clarity, so we don't contaminate the work we do with our inner junk.
Thank you.
I appreciate the question very much, Clemens. I think that we have to acknowledge how deeply our religious traditions are connected with certain cultural, economic, and political systems, so much so that we take all of these systems as part of the reality. And sometimes to even see what is happening, to see the reality of how these systems impede human flourishing, we have to have an experience of standing outside of those systems. Mm-hmm. In my own case, that the ability to stand outside and to see my own tradition with new eyes, and that's why I value it so deeply, has come to me through interreligious dialogue, through engagement with people of other traditions. I see more clearly myself, I see more clearly my tradition, and in addition to that, I see more clearly the resources within my own tradition to contest those structures of inequality and oppression. So that lens that we need sometimes outside to see better what's happening inside.
Thank you very much.
I think it's our moral obligation to be willing to be much more activist in terms of changing policies, changing structures, electing people, and we must be courageous to realize that it's okay to talk about faith-based principles and practices, to talk about making sure that people can have time and energy and support for a spiritual life. And so I think all of us can say, okay, I will become more socially active with my faith-based partners or with ecological groups or with whatever people you want to work with, but not be afraid to talk about your religious values and your spiritual life as part of it. It's just part of who we are, our lives, and it needs to be part of our systems going forward.
Thank you. Any wisdom, Mahan?
Well, I just wonder about singling out religion. Is that we label it and then we say it can cause problems, so leave it out, and then let's figure it out without religion. But there's still something there, right? there are people of faith there. And if we're talking about integral human development, so how are they navigating their internal personalities as they try to conform to the institutional dynamics that are in play? Right? That's the question. I'll give you a quick example how to think about this, at least how I think about it. You know, religion does a lot of humanitarian work, faith-based organizations, right? And we're dealing with refugees now. One of the local organizations has received Afghan refugees. And now we're talking about Ukraine, right? And so we solve these problems for society. Before it was Iraq. They're still here. Bosnia. We have, in the Muslim community here, many Bosnians. And so my question is, what is it on the other end that is sending us these refugees? That is creating the conditions that say, okay, here's some problems. There's some kind of thinking going on, a rationale that has produced that world. And what I want to think about is, it's not neutral. There's a value there, and we call it neutral. We call it encumbered by faith, subjectivities, but it's encumbered by human subjectivities, where there are different ways in which the faith is processed. And so to frame it as, let's keep religion this way and secular this way is just a whole kind of problem. And when we think about remaking the world and integral human development, we need to, I think, actively think about how religion will play a role that's different than the one that it's been assigned to today.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any reaction? You don't have to.
Yeah, no. I just was thinking one of the phrases that always echoes in my mind is, people are children of God. So that's a Christian construction, but it's about seeing the other as part of the whole moral universe, or the whole cosmos, or even just the whole human universe. And therefore, even if you don't like that other, you still have to look for the humanity and force yourself and retrain yourself to see the humanity. And this may be an abstract response to Mahan's comment, but at the root of the violence is a failure to see the other as a full human being just like yourself.
Thank you.
And it's not easy.
Thank you. Can I move to a second topic closely related to that? Caroline talked about the experience of the sacred and the experience of mystery. And Anantanand reminded us of the 4 dimensions, also beyond the moral. The spiritual as a dimension beyond the moral. And I'm interested in this question of what's the added value through the spiritual and the religious which goes beyond ethics and morality. Because we have philosophy, we have ethics, we have morality, we have all kinds of norms. But what does religion add that may be very important and something, going back to Mahan and Caroline, that helps us understand our humanity? Any take, maybe Anantanand?
Well, for me, again, I come from a non-dual Hindu tradition that really speaks eloquently about an ultimate ontological unity at the heart of all reality. That if we see reality at its deepest levels, which includes us as living beings, but also includes the world of nature, there is a fundamental oneness. So that's the ontological claim, and all of the ethical obligations that we have flow out of that ontological reality. So that ontology provides the ground for ethics. It enriches ethics. Ethics don't stand apart from understanding the nature of being and the nature of reality. And I think also on a more practical, experiential level, we have the testimony, I'm speaking of my tradition, but I think universally of our religious traditions, that only some deep understanding of the transcendent really fully satisfies human being. That there is a lack, there is a dissatisfaction, there's an inadequacy, even if we are satisfied the moral dimension of life, that only the transcendent dimension of life. So we have the experience of the religious traditions that speak to the necessity for that, addressing that spiritual dimension.
Thank you. As you mentioned Augustine before,
Yeah.
Inquietum est qua nostrum, donne requiescat in te, as Augustine said in his letter to the time. The limits of ethics. Any insights, Claire?
You know, I want to.
I ask Claire.
Oh, you asked Claire?
Yes.
Sorry.
You're most welcome to speak
No,
after
no, I
Claire.
didn't.
Okay.
I think that we have to remember there's body, mind, and spirit. And so for us to really understand who we are, we need a rich spiritual life, and that's where religious practice comes into daily life. And so for me, religion and spirit go way beyond ethics because it speaks very deeply to who we are and knowing ourselves and understanding ourselves. And can I just quickly add, everybody has time for these things in their life because we need to make the time, both for our spiritual life, but also for now. If you aren't out there helping to change the world, to relieve suffering, to make the world a better place, then find the time, because I think it's our obligation, both moral, ethical, and spiritual, to do that. So please, thank you.
Thank you, Claire.
Yeah, you know, along the same lines, I think something that deep spirituality provides is it pushes us from a kind of consequentialist thinking to a deontological thinking.
I'm sure we can all follow you.
Which means that instead of thinking about what is possible, like the consequences, or thinking about what we should do in terms of, you know, a kind of material consequentialism, we shift our framework to thinking about what we must do. Because then what is impossible begins to become possible because we can do it because we must do it. And you get a will that is grounded in a kind of ultimate concern, and you're willing to, you know, go as far as you need to go in order to see its fruition. There is a consequentialism, I think, that spirituality provides, but it shifts it into a metaphysical plane.
Thank you. They sometimes say there are two ways of making decisions. One is you have options and you choose the best option, and the other is you stand and you can no other thing. You have to do that.
Yes.
And that's where I think I understood you to bring the spiritual dimension in.
And one thought, how do you have the strength to stand there? You draw on that deep well.
Yeah, what Claire mentioned about the practices. Yeah, and we have time for that. If you have time for this panel, you have time for those practices. The third theme I would like to explore in the last 7 minutes is probably the most painful one, and it's the question of the connection between religion and flourishing, or spirituality and happiness. Because coming from a Christian tradition, the Sermon on the Mount and the Beatitudes are very important reference points for us. And I once remember a theologian saying, you do not find the Beatitude, blessed are those who are happy. You do not find that. And you do not find the idea that Jesus promised us an easy life. Even the way he described the life prepared for the disciples is not by any imagination a life of happiness in a very superficial sense. So I would like to hear your wisdom on how do you see the connection between religion and flourishing, or spiritual tradition and happiness? Maybe starting with Claire, since you mentioned happiness explicitly in this deep Buddhist way.
That's a wonderful question, and thank you for organizing us so well. I think, let me return to, if you want to be happy, go out and help the world. I recently went out and worked with a group of environmental justice people to stop some terrible air pollution from oil extraction in Kern County. And those people came from many different religions, and we weren't scared to talk about faith, but we also weren't scared to take on big oil. And so it was critical that we work together. And so for me to be happy, and for all of us to be happy, first of all, we work with each other. And we help each other, and we have each other's back. And that helps us get through the day. It helps us really fight what is somewhat evil forces around us. And for me, that's the heart of religion and spirituality, to come together, to fight evil, and to really try and relieve suffering, because that makes us happy. It's truly a win-win.
Thank you. I just had a meeting this morning with the Ukrainian Catholic University, and that's what they do. They stand together, they fight evil. And whether we call this happiness or not is a deep question, but obviously they have a lot of purpose in that. Any wisdom on my question? To my left, anyone?
I'll just note that I would call it joy, and two of the most joyful people in the world. There's actually a film about them about to come out. Well, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who's left us now, and the Dalai Lama, and their capacity living through great suffering and not turning away from it to somehow find joy. And it's still a puzzle to me. I can't say I understand it, but I take note, and there's something for me to learn there.
Thank you, Carolyn. Pope Francis wrote this, The Joy of the Gospel document in November 2013, which I find so powerful about the role of joy also in a religious dimension.
I suppose I should give a good answer to this because my name is Anant Ananda, which means infinite joy.
Oh, please give us a good answer, please.
All right, we're ready.
Please, we are ready.
I'm not sure.
No pressure.
No, but in line with what both of you said, I mean, one of the names of God in the Hindu tradition is Ananda, or joy. And one of the fruits of religious awakening is the discovery of that deep joy, that deep, sometimes we speak of it as fullness, that fullness that is within one's own being, where one experiences the divine, the sacredness. So the one who has that wisdom is always described as rejoicing in the joy of others, because it enables us to live from a place of joy, live out of a certain fullness of being. In that way, we promote the flourishing. So one of the statements used repeatedly in our sacred text is the joy because of which one delights in the joy of others, but the joy because of which one identifies with the suffering of others as well. Really interesting comment.
Thank you. Beautiful. It's 1:27. We will come now to our final statements. We will start with Mahan and end with Carolyn. You have 1.5 sentences to give us a brief, brilliant, and deep message.
Well, I invite everyone to think about this world as a metaphor. Are we on a cruise ship where some things are breaking down that we just need to fix and keep sailing? Or are we on the Titanic? And depending on how you answer that question will determine how you're going to act.
Thank you, Man. That was deep. I appreciate it. Yeah. Okay.
I love being in a place where I assume everyone's already read Laudato Si, and if you haven't, read it and read it again. This book will tell us how we can actually save the planet as we live lives of meaning. And so I really thank you for being here, for caring, and together we will continue the process of doing the things that we want to do to make the world a better place. So thank you. We have a lot of work to do, but we can do it.
Thank you, Claire. My favorite passage in Laudato Si is 2:17. The outer deserts have grown because the inner deserts have become so far and vast, and that's one of the topics of this panel.
No, I think that, and I hope that all of you have seen this powerfully and clearly in our short dialogue today, because I think it reinforces what is one of my own fundamental commitments, that we can't work together for promoting human flourishing without the dialogue among the religious traditions of our world. And already, there is so much to learn from what each one said today. May we grow this kind of dialogue, this kind of conversation, and may such growth contribute to the flourishing.
Thank you. The last word, Caroline.
Yeah. I have gray hair. I've learned some things, but I certainly know so little. And I'll just summarize what I know from my life at this point. that I need to live deeply with all the things we do for the world and help the world, but to live deeply, to love mightily as best I can, and to figure out what the dickens that means to love in a public as well as private way. And finally, to walk humbly with your God, with my God.
Micah
with
6:8.
Thank you. I should study the Bible too, so I can quote
Let's
verses.
give a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you so much. Thank you. At 2 o'clock, the next panel will start. My dean, do you have an announcement to make? No, he's just coming up to thank the panelists. Enjoy your life and the rest of it, and see you at 2 o'clock in the next building. Thank you so much.